First of all, you say you support the Iranian people, but you're pronouncing our country's name wrong. Our country is named Iran, not Iran. Please, once and for all, let's get this clear. Second of all, are you okay to be representing a country that has so much discrimination against black people in its own borders? And we saw the Black Lives Matter movement over the past few years. Are you okay to be representing the US? Meanwhile, there's so much discrimination happening against black people in America.
My apologies on the mispronunciation of your country. Yeah, that being said, you know, there's discrimination everywhere you go. You know, one thing that I've learned, especially from living abroad in the past years and having to fit in different cultures and kind of assimilate into different cultures, is that in the U.S. we're continuing to make progress every single day.
Adams really did a great job thinking on his feet there. But, Megan, what about the fact that the Iranian state media basically hijacked that news conference, which should have been just an ordinary pre-match news conference, and what the tensions are there as we all watch to see what the Iranian team does after we know that they were silent during the national anthem on a previous match, and now what's going to happen today?
You know, Andrea, you're absolutely right. I mean, this was very unusual, an unexpected press conference. And, you know, you just played the sound from team captain Tyler Adams there, who answered those questions with incredible poise and respect and class. You know, what we're seeing here is that this tournament is a lot more than just games. It's not just about soccer. It's the intersection, really, of politics and human rights and sports really colliding all together. And just recently, we had the U.S. Soccer Federation, where they had that one-time graphic where they removed the Islamic Republic emblem from the flag. That, of course, angering the Iranians. The team saying that they knew nothing about that, but yet they're now kind of caught in the crosshairs of it all. I had an opportunity to ask the team, there's a lot of distractions off the pitch. How do you stay focused? Is this a distraction for you at all? And they said, look, while they stand with human rights, they stand with women's rights, they stand in solidarity with the women of Iran fighting for basic human rights. When they take the pitch, they're focused on one thing, and that's winning. And of course, in just a couple of hours, they are going to be playing a really important game against Iran. It's a must-win for Team USA. If they win, that means they will advance to the next round, where they will likely take on the Netherlands on Saturday. If they lose, Andrea, they head home. So a lot on their plate.
And we'll all be watching. Megan Fitzgerald, thank you so much for all your coverage there. Ben Rhodes, as a former Deputy National Security Advisor and I assume a soccer fan, it went a lot further than that. I mean, the Secretary of State, you heard him say, this is not about geopolitics, let the game speak for itself. But with U.S. coach Greg Berhalter being asked about the American economy and the U.S. naval presence in the Persian Gulf, all attempts by Iran through the state media are trying to disparage America.
Yeah, there's nothing new about that, Andrea. They've been doing that for years. I think the problem for Iran is that the whole world can see what the view of the Iranian people is through these protests, and the view of Iranian women through these protests. Their efforts to try to distract from that by trying to spotlight America's own problems, America's own racial disparities, is not going to take away the attention from what the world can see plainly happening in Iran. And most importantly, the fact that the Iranian soccer team seems to be in solidarity with Iran's women and with those protesters by staying silent during the national anthem. That is a huge embarrassment to the Islamic Republic. And so the stance that these players, the Iranian players are taking, that to me is the most interesting thing that's happening at the World Cup, and the thing that I think that the Iranian government is probably most worried about. Normally, they'd be trying to gin up national pride, anti-American sentiment with the kinds of hijinks that we saw at that press conference. But what they're dealing with is a team that seems to be in solidarity with the protest movement.
And Grant Wahl, let's focus on the team. After all, this is the World Cup. So far, 2 ties, 1 a disappointment with Wales, then such a strong performance against England. What is the team's mindset with so much attention and everything on the line today?
score goals. You have to win this game. And so the expectation is that Iran, which only needs a tie most likely to advance tonight, the U.S. needs a win, but Iran needs a tie, that Iran is going to play very defensively, and it's going to be on the U.S. team to try to break down this Iranian defense. And that will not be easy. And the U.S. hasn't won many games over the years at the Men's World Cup. So winning games here is not easy, but this is a good U.S. team. They performed consistently during this tournament, and I think they should be able to win tonight, but it's going to be very, very difficult.
Well, thanks so much to you, Grant. I know you've got a lot to do before the game, but Ben, I want to stick with you for a second on a couple of other foreign policy points. Let's talk about China and the crackdown against the protests spreading. It's hard to tell, isn't it? It's widespread against the lockdowns, but, just how significant is this? It's unprecedented. We've never seen protests against Xi Jinping just after he's won his unprecedented third term.
Well, it's hugely significant, Andrea. We haven't seen anything like this in China in many, many years. And I think it's even more significant because there's not an obvious way out for Xi Jinping. It's his zero COVID policy that he's dug in on. And so he either has to concede that that policy is failing and then he needs to make a U-turn by opening things up or by reaching out for vaccines to other parts of the world, or he has to clamp down, as he probably most likely will, and risk even greater unrest and even greater economic slowdown in China. We've already seen significant hits to the economy from this zero COVID policy. So he has no easy way out of this. Either he's going to have to lose face by changing his policy or risk more unrest by digging in with a policy that is clearly angering his own people.
And here's what Secretary Blinken had to say about this at our news conference today about China.
When it comes to the protests that we're seeing in China, protests that we're seeing for different reasons in Iran, in other places, our position is the same everywhere, which is that we support the right of people everywhere to peacefully protest.
So they are, obviously the administration is committed to supporting the protesters without trying to go too far, I suppose, when they're talking about either China or Iran. Well, Iran less so than China, because with China it is a much more delicate, a much more complicated relationship. I want to briefly pivot to news, though, from Paul Whelan's family. You've had so much experience having to deal with hostages around the world when you were in the national security team. They have not heard from Paul Whelan, still in Russian custody in a penal colony. And they had their weekly scheduled phone call on Thursday. He missed it. They're really getting concerned as the days progress. The U.S. consulate officials in Moscow say that they've also not had their contacts. Are we increasingly concerned about Paul Whelan's health and welfare, as well as, of course, Brittany Griner?
Yeah, I mean, this is really disturbing news, Andrea, because obviously we know the conditions in Russian penal colonies are not good at all. And that the risk of something bad happening or deteriorating health is very present in the minds, I'm sure, of Paul Whelan's family and Brittany Griner's as well. There have been these discussions around a potential prisoner swap. I think the challenge is, obviously, U.S.-Russia relations couldn't be in a worse place. Vladimir Putin has clearly shown that he's willing to go past any norm to any length in his conflict with the West. And so there's not a lot of maneuvering room. There's great sense of urgency to bring these Americans home, but we're trying to bring them home in the most difficult circumstances possible with Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner in very challenging conditions of detention. So it's just a very difficult time, and hopefully the administration can get something done here through a swap, but there's no guarantee.